We will skip the lesson tonight on how we got the Bible, since there's some that wanted to hear that particular sermon and they were not able to be with us tonight. So I want you to, I know that was what we announced we were singing, but I'm going back to the character study. I don't know how you study your Bible, but from year to year, I try to do something different in my personal study work. And this year I'm considering characters of the Bible and lessons they can teach me. I won't preach that every Sunday. And we're going to go tonight to the book of Judges, and we're going to look at Judges chapter 6 and Judges chapter 8. A man named Gideon. We're going to look at the story of Gideon. One that was minding his own business. One that was not a standout individual. And the Lord sent an angel to him and said, "You're going to lead the people." I wonder how many of us would answer the call to duty. How many of us would be the Gideons? We're going to begin to pick that up. And let's go to Judges chapter 6. Let's read the first few verses to get the context. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them in the hand of Midian for 7 years. Once again, Ricky, I was trying this week. You asked in the Bible class, how many times Israel had been punished? I don't know that I can count them. I tried, and I was thinking about that, and I was looking some of that, and that's when I came across Gideon. And these Israelites, they had a cycle, especially during the days of the judges. They'd serve the Lord under one judge, and then they'd get blessed, and then they would go back into idolatry, and then they would depart again. And the vicious cycle just kept occurring over and over and over again. And it's because they would forget to retain God in their knowledge. And God they would go into various cycles. And that's one of the cycles we find them in. Gideon, I believe, is the sixth judge. He's kind of between some of the good judges and some of the bad judges. He's kind of right in the middle, if you would. As the judges goes, the Israelites were under the captivity of the Midianites, and he began to continue on with that. In verse 10, I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But you have not obeyed my voice. And that's a problem that we have today. And I think even in our society, we begin to get at ease in Zion. We begin to get complacent. We get comfortable. And go to Joash, the Amorites, says, well, his son Gideon thrashed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from Midianites. The first thing I want you to know is that Gideon was a working man. Pardon me. He is one that, and he had some type of intelligence, because he was doing it in such a way that they wouldn't know he was thrashing the wheat. He was busy working when he was called. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." You mighty man, you one that have the ability to do the things that you need to do. The word valor carries with it the valiance, carries with it the courage, carries with it the demeanor. He was one that he had what it took. He had what it was take to answer the call of duty. And that's where I want you to begin our study tonight. He was not lagging behind. He was willing to set the pace. He was willing to do what he was called to do. God uses people who are willing to work. We're told to be steadfast, unmovable, always abound in the work of the Lord. In 1 Corinthians 15:58. There's always something we can do, but I want you to notice something else as we think about Gideon. He didn't just stop what he was doing and immediately begin to do what God told him to do. He was an honest man. He questioned them. Notice verse 13. Gideon said to the angel, and he said, "Oh, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? If you're for us, why has this adversity come my way? Why are the bad things happening to good people?" I think that's kind of the question that Gideon asked. And it's not one of the lack of faith. It's one that he just simply wanted the question answered. You think about Job. We've talked about Job some. Job is one that he had questions. He did not compromise in integrity. He did not compromise his faith, but he asked questions. There is nothing wrong with us asking questions to secure our own minds, to secure our own intellect, to secure our own willingness, and to answer the call to duty. Gideon said to him, "Why are these things happening?" And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about? All of our ancestors has told us about this God. How do I know he's real? How do I know what he's doing? We must be open and honest about what's going on around us. And I think that's the integrity that Gideon set forth. He wanted to know. Tell me why. Did you not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? And but the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. Then the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you? Have I not chosen you, Gideon? Have I not called you to duty? He said, you know, there's a place I want you to go. Thinking about Abraham. Abraham was called. He said, you take all you've got and you leave your homeland and you go to a land I'll show you. Sometimes, my friends, when God calls, the task is before us. We simply need to recognize it because God has sent us. Now, here again, I don't want to get too far off the lesson, but we're told, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Take the church is the pillar of the ground of the truth. You and I as Christians, we're God's army. We've heard those sermons, but are we fulfilling those missions? Are we fulfilling the task that God has put before us? Gideon says, okay. So he said to him, oh, my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest. He said, here I am the poorest of the poor. He said, I'm the weakest one. I have the least to offer. I may have the situation. He humbled himself. And he says, I am the least in my father's house. Isn't there somebody else better, Lord? Why? And the Lord said to him, surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man. God has chosen the weak to confound the mighty. God has taken the insignificant to command the wisdom of the world. And sometimes, my friends, that's what we have today. We need to accept the simplicity. And I want you to notice something else here. As I think about Gideon, and we're going to study the battle of Gideon. We're going to look at his battle plan in just a moment. But he said, by one man of the weakest clan, one man can make a difference. Are you the one? Am I the one? Many times we use the excuse, I don't know enough, Lord. I can't teach my neighbor, Lord. I can't, Lord, I'm not as smart as somebody else. Can't you send somebody else? Gideon, he says, surely I will be with you. If God can be for us, who can be against us? We need to learn that lesson. And we need to learn it as Gideon learned it. Gideon learned that lesson. If I find favor in your sight, then show me a sign. Well, I'm going to say this. Gideon wanted proof from God that it was the right thing to do. He wanted to hear it, but he said, Lord, I want to make sure that it's you talking. I want to give me a sign, Lord. Prove it to me. And of course, we know the sign. Do not depart from here. I will pray till I come to you, and my offering set it before you. And he said, wait. Prepare a young goat and another brother and heifer and a flour. The meat he put on it, put in the broth of the pot, and brought them out to him under the type tree and presented them. The angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on the rock and pour out the broth. And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat, and the unleavened bread and fire rose out of the rock and consumed the meat, and the unleavened bread, and the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. Now Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord. Gideon finally got it. Sometimes, folks, as I think about Gideon, God has to prove to us, with our questions, that we're headed in the right direction. Gideon was headed in the right direction. At last I have seen the angel of the face of the Lord. But I want you to notice something in verse 23. Peace be with you. And notice that. Do not fear, you shall not die. Gideon, you're going to be okay if you do God's bidding. Now, there again, that's Andy's thought on that one. Gideon, you're going to be okay if you'll do it God's way. If you will understand what he's doing. Sometimes I think we miss that. We miss that lesson. Lord, I don't know why. I've said before many times, Lord, don't move the mountain. Just give me the faith to climb over it. Don't move the mountain. Sometimes we come to the mountain, we come to the task before us, we come to the problem, we come to the adversity, we come to the situation, and we want God to remove the situation. Perhaps we don't. God may not, his promise or care may not remove it, but he might give us the faith to climb over it. Lord, don't take my mountain away. Just give me the faith to climb over it. And we have, the idea about Gideon in Hebrews the 11th chapter. Gideon was mentioned there as one that had faith. It's the only time Gideon's mentioned in the New Testament. He was mentioned with the others. He walked by faith. He had a trust in God. Gideon did exactly what he was told to do. He built the altar. It came to pass that the Lord did all he did. He took the bull. And he told him, he said, you go tear down the Baal's altar. The altar that you built to man. In verse 25, and now it came to pass the same night, the Lord said to him, take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal. Go against your family. Go against he was a courageous man. He went against his family, but destroying his father's idols. You read verses 25, and about verse 32. We see where he did that. He took 10 men. He didn't do it in the daytime. And here again, I think he showed a little bit of intelligence there. Now, I don't think somebody said, he was a coward. He wasn't a coward. He knew he couldn't go against him in the daytime. So he took 10 men. He had the courage to do what God told him to do, even when it went against the odds. He went by night. He took down the altar in verse 27. So Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and did as the Lord had said to him. Because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it at night, he did it by day, he did it by night. I think, once again, it shows wise judgment when he did that. And when the men of the city rose up the next morning, the altar's been torn down. They want to call him out and they want to execute him for doing what God told him to do. Gideon is one they wanted to kill him. But his dad said, no, I'll not send him out. Let Baal, the god, rise up. Let Baal, the god, defend himself. Verse 31, but Joash said to all who stood against him, would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him plead for himself because his altar's been torn down. Let him deal with it himself if he's a god. Therefore, on the day he called him Jerubbaal, saying, the Lord Baal pleaded against him because he has torn down his altar. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east gathered together and crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. I want you to know something. God was with him. The Spirit of God came upon Gideon, and he blew the trumpet, and the Amorites gathered behind him. Now, as we begin to pick up a story now, we're going to get against all odds. Pat, I want you to go out here, and I want you to fight the U.S. Army and every soldier at Fort Polk. And I want you to take yourself and Brenda with you. That's all you go. You're going to take 2 people. You're going to take 2 ladies, and you're going to go out there to Fort Johnson, and you're going to walk up to the front gate, and you're going to say, I'm here to seize the encampment. What's the odds they're going to listen to you? What's the odds they go? I like this battle story. Gideon said, okay, I'll take the army. I believe he started out with 21,200 something men, 10,000 remain. God said, no, that's still too many. Reduce it again. We don't need that many, but the Lord said again, the people are still, in verse 4 of chapter 7, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water and I'll test them again. We know the story. He took them down there, and those that lapped water or those that dipped water, There was 300 passed the test. Now, that's not real good odds. Gideon understood that if God be for us, who can be against us? He took 300 men and went against them. But I want you to notice his battle plan. It's almost as foolish and stupid as when the walls of Jericho fell down. And here again, I use those two words to make a point. I'm not calling God's plan stupid or foolish, either one. He didn't go in with a sword. He didn't go in. He took those same things. He went down and he overheard a dream, if you would. He trusted God's plan so that he would give God the victory for the Mennonites. It was when Gideon heard the telling in verse 15. It was when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation that he worshiped. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, "Arise, the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into." Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies. That's 100 people. That's 100 men apiece. And notice what he gave them. He gave them a trumpet, an empty pitcher, and a torch. In fact, that's all you and Brenda can have to go out there to take Fort Johnson. You're going to take you a trumpet or a whistle. You're going to take you a quart jar, and you're going to take you a flashlight. Is that any battle plan to go against the odds of this mighty army? God's hand was in it all. Folks, don't doubt God's simplicity. Don't doubt God's plan. Whether it's the plan of salvation, or it's the plan of the work of the church, or it's the mission of the church, we're told to go into all the world and preach the gospel in the pure and simplistic form. We're not told to indoctrinate it. We're not told to encourage it. We're not told to liberalism. We're not told to promote it. You take the truth of God, you go preach the death, burial, and the resurrection of Christ, and people will obey it. It worked in the New Testament times, and it'll work tonight. Against all the odds of religion, and against all the immorality, and against all the odds of society, God's plan of simplicity of the gospel. You take 3 items. You take a trumpet, you take a pitcher, and you take a torch, and you go down here to the city, and you take this city. God's hand took God's providential care. That's a point. Gideon, I think he relied upon that. The strategy, it goes against any human reasoning. He came to the camp and when I blow the trumpet and all are with me, then you shall blow the trumpet, serve the Lord, and of Gideon. So the men went down in verse 19. They did that. The 3 companies broke them and blew the pitchers, and it scared the people to death. They ran. The men of Israel, and when the 300 men blew the trumpet, in verse 22, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp, and the army fled. They got out of there. Why? You can't fight against God. You can't fight against God's plan. That's the lesson I learned from that. God fights the battles for us when all the odds are against us. When the world says no, God says yes. When the world says you can't, God says you can. You take 300 men. Instead of taking 20,000, he took 300. He split them in 3 ways. He gave them 3 items and told them, go down, and when I blow the trumpet, break the pitchers, and it's going to scare the enemy to death. That's not a battle plan that makes any sense, is it? No more than when Joshua walked around the cities of Jericho and blowed the ram's horn when the walls came tumbling down. God's plan works when it is executed as God laid it out. God's plan works. It has in every case of the Old Testament. There's other characters that do the same thing. But Gideon, 300 men, he did that. He trusted God, and then he gave God the credit. Now, notice something else. Here we have Gideon is a victorious man. He's on top of the world. He's got everything he needs. Gideon, come be our king. You're a great man. When the man of Ephraim said to him, why have you done this? Dost not call on us when we went to fed? He secures the area without all the strength of those that came to help him. But then, notice who he gave the credit to in verse 3. God has delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Orb, and Zeb. And when I was able to do in comparison with you, then their anger towards him subsided. He gave them the credit. I'll do all things that I can for you. Then they came to him, and they asked him, be our king, be our leader. He says, no, I'll not do that. I will continue to trust God. He was a humble man. He was a persistent man, but he was a working man, but he didn't accept the praise for it. He delivered it. He went up and did all that he did to him. He took down the tower and all the things he needed to do. He finished the things. And notice something else. And here again, my mind is strange. Gideon did something that a young man could have done, but wouldn't have done. Let's pick up in verse 18 of chapter 8. And he said to Zebulun, what kind of men were they whom you killed at Tarshish? So they answered, as you were, so were they. Each one resembled the son of a king. Then they said, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you let them live, I would not kill you. And he said to Jethro, his firstborn, rise and kill them. He told a young man, rise and kill them, do it. But the youth would not draw his sword, for he was afraid because he was still a youth. The little boy, the young man, I can't do that. I know what the command is, but rise up yourself and kill us first. So Gideon arose in verse 21 and killed him and took the crescent. Gideon did the job and took the position of example. The young man, he couldn't. He said, my youth, he said, I can't do that. He said, I just can't do it. Gideon set the example for the young man to follow. And that's a grotesque thing. He told him to kill him. I got the context. But the point being, Gideon became an example to those generations behind him, his firstborn. Can we not today learn from that? He did that. Verse 20, then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son and your grandson also, for you have delivered us from the hand of the Midian. But Gideon said to him, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Look at that lesson. The Lord shall rule over you. He did not get sidetracked because of his victory. He did not get sidetracked because of his accomplishments. The men of Israel came to him and said, Gideon, you be the leader. You take control, Gideon. You did that. And he said, no. The Lord has all authority. Is that not a lesson for us to learn from this life of Gideon? The authority of God and God's rule should not be compromised. We shouldn't get sidetracked into thinking that we've accomplished anything. And I want you to think about the amount of faith. Hebrews 11:32, Gideon is listed in the roll call of the faithful as a man of faith. We need the faith of Gideon in our life. We need to be mighty in valor. We need to be courageous. And we need to follow all of his things. I want you to notice the end of Gideon's life. And this is about all we're going to find of Gideon. Then Jeroboam in verse 29 went out, and Gideon had 70 sons. 70 sons who were his offspring, for he had many wives. And his concubines, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, whose name he called Abimelech. Now Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of Joash his father in Ophrah of the Emirates. So it was as Gideon was dead that the children of Israel again played the harlot. Gideon died at a good old age, but notice how long it lasted. Shortly thereafter, the Israelites went right back where they came from. The example of Gideon was a good example, But Israel did not learn their lesson. So many times today, we have good men who go before us, but then we don't learn the lesson. I want you to think about the life of Gideon. A very simple lesson. When we read these Old Testament characters, think about how they mean to us. Am I a Gideon? If God was to call me, and he does, he calls us to commit thou to faithful men to preach others, I'll teach others also, or he calls us to be elders in the church, or he calls us to a task to lead the congregation, or he calls us and asks to be hospitable, or he calls us. We have responsibility that God has told us to do. Can we not be Gideons? Yes, we have questions. Lord, are you sure? Lord, am I the one you really want to do it? Lord, prove it to me. Where's the authority for it? Where's the rule for it? How do you want me to do it, Lord? Having those questions is not wrong, but not accepting the responsibility and saying, Lord, here am I. Use me. And then doing it God's plan. Gideon said, I'll take 21,000 men down here and I'll whip them Midianites. God said, oh no, not that way you won't. You're going to take 300 men, those who lap the water. You're going to take 300 men. You're going to divide them in three things. You're going to give them a torch. You're going to give them a trumpet. And you're going to give them 3 items. And when you blow the horn, break the pitcher and shine the light. And God's enemies ran. Very simple plan. Can we be the Gideons tonight to do it God's way? When I read Gideon, the story of it, there's some things I came up with. And then a man of faith, a man who trusted God. And when we do that, we can die a fulfilled and live life. Gideon did. He died with 70 children, 70 sons, and he was buried. It's the point a man wants to die. The mortality of Gideon should also teach us, are you ready for that? Has your life so lived that you can die in good old age? A fulfilled life? I think Gideon had a fulfilled life. As we think about it, a man of faith. Are you the Gideon tonight? Can I encourage you to think about being a Gideon? Think about it. And I'm making a decision, somebody to obey the gospel. I want you to make your life right. As you sing the song that's been selected.